All right. Well, I'm Scott Cuthbert, co-founder of Safepedia, and with me today is Sarah Bellini Ross for another exciting episode of Hard Hat and Heart, human-centered innovation. So, Sarah, we have a pretty interesting guest today, and I think this is going to be a really great conversation.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to hear about Andrea and the work that she's been doing in this industrial tech transformation space. Andrea, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sarah, Scott, thanks for having me. Am very passionate about this space, as you know, and anyone that gives me a platform to talk, I am always delighted. So about me, my background, I'm a mechanical engineer. And when I graduated, it was difficult to find a job. So I actually did a master's in organizational behavior and change management. My background, heavy oil and gas, I dabbled in the downstream a bit, but then I moved to the upstream in Fort McMurray, Alberta. And for 10 years, I worked in various field adjacent roles. And one of my favorite positions was as shift supervisor to a crew of 11 hardworking operators, making oil on the front line, seeing how workers tick, what motivates them, what challenges they have. And all of that prior to me eventually coming down to Calgary at corporate for Suncor with their connected worker program. So in this connected worker program, in this field enablement program, we are heavily focused on worker safety and getting tools to the front line that feel like help, that make workers happier to be there, safer to be there, and to enable them to do work more effectively. And that's currently the journey that I'm on with Suncor.
That's awesome. I love how safety is so integrated into the work that you're doing. What's a typical day for you look like?
Oh, typical day for me. I am constantly talking to our workers that are boots on the ground making oil at all 17 of our operating sites. So truly, it's a day of getting feedback from those workers. I work with our software vendors to make sure that we have enhancements in place to get them user interface improvements so that we have greater engagement. It's working at the center at Suncor to make sure that we're standardizing our processes and being more effective using technology. I absolutely love this job because I get to work with everyone. I get to work with our lawyers for unions. I get to work with labor relations. I get to work with like our senior folks in operations to make sure that we are digitalizing processes to keep our workers safe. I get to work with engineering to make sure that our industrial devices meet our codes for electrical certifications. It's really a cool job.
It sounds like such a fun but constantly changing and evolving job as well. What are some of the big challenges you run into in your current space of trying to bring all of this connected workforce to the industry?
The biggest challenge is like we know that the technology is good. We use the technology in our regular everyday life. Like as an example, we all rely on our phones for getting groceries. We all rely on our phones to be like our navigator when we're driving our cars. We also rely on um, applications when we're trying to check into a flight, say when we're about to go traveling. So in our regular lives, we rely so heavily on technology and we know that it's really good because we use it all the time. It's the harder part's always the cultural change and like the true disruption to the way that we've been working since the beginning. So to go from pen and paper to having a supercomputer in your pocket, it's a challenge to coach your organization through that revolution is truly what it is. It's truly revolutionizing the way that we show up to work. So what does that look like? It's lots of conversations with our leadership to say that we have a consistent message down to our union on what device usage looks like, what respectful use of IT looks like, but also expectations to change at a senior leader level where this is now not just a project, but a product. And we're going to be constantly iterating and improving, and nothing's going to be perfect. And We need to engage with the front line a little bit differently, where you have this new power now, where you've collapsed communication such that the CEO can FaceTime with the individual turning valves in the field. What does our communication now look like? So, Sarah, I find myself in the position of like organizational behavior, change management, cultural management, leadership coaching, as much as anything.
And how does human-centered design fit into your work?
I love this question. Uh, the users dictate what is built and designed, and that is the rule. We've tried to do it the other way, where we started our program looking at what's the most productive device. Like, what do we think at the center at corporate is going to be the most productive tool for our workers? And we've sent a lot of these different devices and these tools and software products out to our sites, and we've gotten really low engagement. Like the projects were failures in so much as they didn't get the ROI that we were expecting, but we learned a lot. I actually think that they're successes, but we had to flip that script on its head for us to be successful at Suncor. And now we take the approach of what's the priority at the operating sites? What's the priority of the frontline worker? What are they emotionally attached to in their personal life? 90% of our workers have iPhones. So why don't we just industrialize iPhones? What else do they use? Well, they're comfortable using certain software products that they like, applications that we all like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. How can we make our products such that it's more user friendly and what workers want to use? And if you're doing your projects correctly, you will get the most engagement when the end user dictates the design.
Can you give us an example of where you've had success having the end users really help identify, but then also dictate the design of something that you've been able to implement at scale?
Absolutely. So for our maintenance programs, some of our processes are very much like Suncor and site specific. The way that we've gotten success was developing a low code application in-house with constant daily touch points with the individuals that are going to be using this product during their turnaround event. So as an example, something like scheduling updates. That's disruptive. When you're a foreman and you're working a turnaround, chances are you've never had a phone with you, an intrinsically safe phone. And then you've also probably never used an app to take a photo and update where you are in your turnaround at a certain time in the event. That is extremely disruptive. The way that we got engagement was we sat with those foremen and with those turnaround planners, and we said, this is the back end of the application for the planners. Do you get all the information you need as a manager? And we, sliced and diced and designed in that way for that end user. But then we also worked with the field workers, and originally we designed a product as we all do, and it's somewhat predictable now, where there's too much stuff. When you're in the field and you have gloves on and you are in the middle of a turnaround event, you probably want to see 3 buttons. And that's what we did, is we scaled it back. We constantly had that conversation with the end user, with the foreman, and we delivered an app that was really highly engaged. We got upwards of 95% engagement for our event.
Wow. I think that was a key thing, right? Less is more. So much of the times, technology solutions try to solve every problem, but then it becomes overwhelming and cumbersome to actually use the application. Are there any other lessons you've learned about how to optimize those tools or processes for for the end users who are actually using them?
Yeah. So I have the privilege of seeing what others in industry, in oil and gas, but also in other industries are doing, like warehousing, utilities. And what I am seeing as a trend is there's this trend towards trying to control the technology instead of giving more freedom to the end user. We've had this philosophy such that um, our our devices and our products are relatively not super locked down. There's a lot of freedom for the end users to configure their device, like their phone, to be the interface that they want it to be, that they want it to look a certain way. Maybe they want to have like certain backgrounds and certain shortcuts. We've given them the freedom to do all this because it enables innovation, and innovation in ways that our teams won't think about. And one of the things that I love is we didn't lock down the App Store heavily with our workers. And as a virtue of that, we see workers downloading free apps that help them with their everyday life. And an app that has been wonderful that a lot of workers have used for their own safety now, just like serendipitously, is they found a lightning tracker app in the App Store, and it wasn't even on our radar. But especially for our tailings operators in Fort McMurray, they're working long distances and they're managing their contractors and all these people during electrical storms. And traditionally, what they would do is they'd listen on the radio for the site manager to say, hey, there's an electrical storm coming, like stand down your work, make sure everyone's safe. And then there'd be a confusion. And eventually there'd be another like radio call saying you can go back to work. And the workers, what they did is they downloaded this lightning tracker app. And instead of just waiting for management to come over the intercom, now they're managing their safety with much more savvy using a free application that we didn't even think about.
That's a great example of just giving people the space and the ability to kind of innovate in their own ways to solve problems on their own. How do you share those like best practices across the organization when you find out something like that?
So we share best practices just by we work really closely with our IT departments, and we work really closely with individuals that own our processes. And by having our processes centralized with this OEMS initiative, um, those best practices get translated through all of our processes. I'm sure that you've heard that when you have technology, the technology is meant to support the process. There's people, processes, and tools as a rule. And I think that sometimes we forget about the fact that the tech should be supporting the process, and the process comes first. Again, that is the law. It's the process, and then the tool supports the process. By taking that very structured approach, we are able to make sure that those best practices translate through all of our applications.
Great. Industrial tech transformation, that's like a big world out there. It's with so many different ways that it's going. What are the trends that you're seeing in this space right now?
So the trend that I am seeing, Sarah, is what we realized probably 4 or 5 years ago, which is to take a user design approach. That function always dictates form, and that is the rule. So what I'm seeing is I think that there were a lot of initiatives driven from the center at organizations because it was just in the spirit of we need to digitalize so that we're competitive. And I think organizations are realizing that that might have not been the guiding light and the guiding principle towards getting where they really want to be. And by flipping that script and saying, what do my users want to use? What do my maintainers and operators want to use? Does this tool make them safer and happier and more able to do their job? By taking that as their guiding light, I'm seeing industry changing and really flipping things such that the technology that we're giving our workers, it's more simplified than it was before, and it's more applied technology. It feels like it's helping more than it did before.
Usability and that it helps, right? People want something that helps them. They don't want to have to click through 13 screens to be able to input the information.
Right. It's all about practicality. Like it needs to be like your pipe wrench or your work boots. It needs to be practical. It needs to be easy. And even what I said about the philosophy of not locking down a bunch of our content, I think that our peers and others in industry are realizing that by taking that constrained approach, they're not actually able to get the returns and where they want to with their workforce.
Awesome. How do you balance that push for innovation with the need for operational efficiency?
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so like how do you have this space to innovate and to get things done differently while also making sure that your operations are continuing and maintaining efficiency along the way?
I understand. Um, well, so a lot of times, like I say that I'm not smart, I'm just observant. Like the
Mhm.
operating sites are looking for solutions right now because we're everyone's trying to do more with less, right? And that's the reality. So if I'm seeing things like our operating sites are looking for mobility, or they're looking for an accessory to mobility, or they're looking for an application for a certain process, that's where I know that they need help and we need to prioritize that work. And the way that we balance, like making sure that we don't lose sight of the operation is by making sure that the sites dictate that priority and also what feels like help, being part of that design. And if you design it correctly, like the biggest risk that you'll have is if it doesn't work, which it should work if you're designing it correctly, but if it doesn't, you just go back to the way you were doing it before. Like you go back to pen and paper. And it's like I think that there's this like lens of there being a lot of risk with these projects. But the way I see it, the biggest risk is if you have something that works, you need to have a plan to scale that aggressively so that you don't lose that efficiency.
Do you have any tips and tricks for scaling something that works, and where have you seen success with being able to scale things effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. What what I tell our teams is we know that the technology is good. We know when we design a product and it's meeting the mark because we have this philosophy of working with our end users, and we also know where our gaps are, where it's kind of crummy. When we do a pilot, it's not about even really testing the technology as much as it is taking notes to ensure a much better deployment for the rest of the organization because we already have a plan in place to aggressively deploy at scale across enterprise for these products. What we're looking for in a pilot is not necessarily just the tech, but it is how can we do a better job of change management, of managing certain user groups, of leadership messaging. Like it is truly about how can we scale this out as effectively as possible. Like that's the point of a pilot. And it's having the courage to say, we believe in this, we see that it works, we're getting return in one area. Now we need to go big.
For that, how do you define when you know technology works? You said that a few times that we know this tech works. So what does that definition of working look like for Suncor?
What the guiding light for knowing if things work and you're getting return on investment is user engagement. So the amount of unique users using your product, the amount of like gigabytes used on your field devices. If you are able to, like initially when you deploy a product, you might have your like initial adopters of 5 to 10%. But as you finesse the product and you get better at change management and rolling it out and different expectations among leadership, you should be trying to approach that like 80-90% user engagement to get your return on investment. And once you have that, because those numbers, you can't fake those numbers. Once you have that, then you know that you did a really good job of your project.
Yeah, one thing I like to think about is the like CADWU, or you can't do without this. So if I have a tool and it's so great that if I go to say, okay, the pilot's over, I need to give it back, and people are like, you are not taking this back. I am holding on to this because it helps make my job so much safer, easier, faster, or whatever. That's one of my kind of guiding lights when we know we've really nailed the nail on the head of like we've found the right solution that they don't want to let go of it because it really helps them. Um, do you see what types of technologies? You've talked about apps. Are there other forms of technology that you're deploying or using?
Yeah, so it's like it's a journey. It's a change management journey, and that's why it's so important to start, right? Because it's
Mhm.
not like things can happen overnight. So, like I feel very lucky working at Suncor. We've made some really good foundational decisions. So we have really good connectivity at our operating sites, and it continues to get better. It's prioritized, and I'm grateful for that. We have excellent applications like base applications that are SaaS, they're cloud-based, so that enables our mobility. We now have a cohesive mobility strategy where everyone has these like intrinsically safe phones. Um, and now what we're working on is we're heavily digitalizing anything that is pen and paper to be an application. And what does that look like for certain parts of those applications to be made into apps at the frontline worker level? And then what does it look like for people in the office? So that's a body of work that's going to be for the next several years, is digitalizing all of our processes in a way where we get that engagement. And then along with that, you have data strategy. You make sure your data all looks the same, it's in the same area, because I mean, everyone's talking about it at some point, and we are currently overlaying AI so that we become more efficient. You're able to do predictive modeling. There's just so many efficiencies with artificial intelligence. So that's really the journey that we're on. And it's extremely exciting.
Do you have any advice or tips for people who are just really starting to figure out their data strategy in this digital world, with this opportunity of really aligning your processes, your information, but in a digital way that makes sense, that makes the job easier at the end of the day?
Yes, I will say, especially in industry, no product is perfect, like a third-party vendor product. Nothing is perfect. But spend some time to think about what kind of platform and product you want to invest in, because that will inform your data strategy. So, I mean, it's no secret, like we're a Microsoft shop. So that's truly the platform that we're investing in, along with some others like SAP. And that informs our data strategy heavily. If you have too many applications, then you're not going to get there, that cohesive strategy, or it's going to be much, much more difficult and more expensive. So that's I would think about, spend a lot of time thinking about what platform do you want to invest in, because that will dictate a lot of your future.
And has that helped you kind of avoid those data silos by really focusing, saying, like, we are a Microsoft shop, this has to work with Power BI or whatever, to really alleviate some of that? This data lives in this database, and we have to go here to look at this, and we have to look at this over here. Has that prevented some of those issues for you?
Yes, absolutely. By being strategic and thoughtful about what are the main apps, and why do we have them as our main applications? Why do we have this as our main platform? It's eliminated a lot of headache, and it's driven a lot of standardization, consistency, and efficiency.
And are you using a lot of solutions off the shelf? Are you developing them in-house? Are you working with vendors to make modifications? Kind of how is that magic happening in your organization?
It's all of that. Like you've nailed it. We, as much as possible, try to use products off the shelf. And so we do have that. And with that, is usually tweaking and finessing with some of our vendors. And that's some of what I do. But I get my marching orders from the front line. They tell me what their priorities are and what they want to see for enhancements and why. And I make sure that those support our processes. And then we do this ballet between the vendor and the field worker. Um, Sometimes there's processes where it makes sense to just develop those in-house using low code platforms, because they're very like specific to our industry. And we're just able to get the application as we need it more quickly than if we went and use something that was off the shelf. But for the most part, we try our best to use products that are available.
So you made it sound very clear that you get your marching orders kind of from the front line, from those end users. Now, on the flip side, what strategies are you using to engage leadership when you hear something from the front line and you want to kind of move on that? How do you get that buy-in from stakeholders?
Well, I'm very lucky because we are very operations centric at Suncor. Uh, you get the marching orders from the front line, and then you steward that up to, say, like the operations, like refinery owner, the VP, and they bring that to the center. Like, it is truly the people that are performing the work on the front line. It is their leadership that reaches out to, say, my team, and they dictate what is required and the benefit that they'll see. And it's a contract between us and the operating sites. If we give you a new tool, how are you going to work differently? Like where are you going to see some efficiencies? Because like truly at the end of the day, like we need to make sure that we are a financially viable business. We expect there to be behaviors in the way that we work. And that's that's how we get buy-in for these projects.
And how do you communicate that value of that human-centered design process to really get all of the stakeholders on the same page, but then also communicating that value across the organization so it's just that shared value?
We we validate the value through our site leadership. If they say that they're able to do like a turnaround event with 10% less foreman than they did previously because of that turnaround app, like that's validation that our program was a good investment. When I get stories about workers um, being safer or avoiding certain situations because they had their mobile device on them, that's validation that we are doing the right work. And I mean, safety is harder to quantify in some ways. I mean, we look at our RIFs and our TIFs and benchmark against those, but it's a balance of like real hard like resourcing data and then also those anecdotes of where we've prevented like major failures because we've had real-time communication or certain information at our fingertips where people have had a much more positive outcome with the technology than if they didn't have it.
And how do you kind of handle the fear of technology within some of these deployments for the people who are really hesitant to utilizing the technology? You've talked about having, 85 or 90% adoption. So how do you work with those that are very resistant to change?
I'm smiling because it's like, is it a fear on the front line or is it with the management? Because I feel like I have more fear in the leadership than I do with the front line, because the frontline workers, for the most part, just want to have an easier time doing their job. Like we're already like running like very efficiently. They are looking to do their job more safely and more effectively. And on the front line, what eventually ends up happening is you have FOMO. So 80% of crews will adopt the tech, and then the other 20%, if you're designing your products correctly, they'll realize, hey, I'm working so much harder than my friends. Like I eventually will just get on board. And at a certain point with some of our workers, you have to set expectations at a supervisory level. But again, if you're designing these products the right way, that's what ends up happening is you have this fear of missing out and the workers realizing that their lives will be easier using it. And then in terms of like technology hesitancy at managerial levels, it's again, a lot of our job is coaching individuals through these changes, looking to our peers for data and successful pilots in the way that they look to us for data and successful pilots. And it's having that courage to take the step and be part of this transformation journey. Like it takes a lot of courage for our leadership to do this.
One thing I love is you've mentioned change management probably 15 times already, which is so critical to successful transformation because so many of the times we really focus on the project management of getting it rolled out, getting it adopted, but we forget about the whole people side of things where change management really comes in. For people who are newer to the idea of using change management with transformation, what advice or what tips would you give them?
That's a good one. Well, I mean, like I'm very lucky that I was formally trained in change management. There's lots of resources, like from like almost a scientific standpoint that I don't think people appreciate. When it comes to change management and organizational behavior, like it is a science. It's not just a term that's like kind of a squishy term that's thrown around to make us all feel good. Like there's actually a science behind successful change. There's a cocktail, a recipe. And along with that, it's to, have the right people with the right experience on your teams. Like our teams are resourced with people, the majority of them, they're not from tech, they're not from IT. They're from the field. They know how the end users eat, sleep, and breathe because it is a change management. It's a change management philosophy that you have the right people that are able to empathize and connect with the individuals that are experiencing the change. And like I said, like knowing your change champions at sites, with knowing your end users really well, and especially with these end users, to do a deployment remotely, you're going to see limited engagement and therefore limited success. Like you actually need to put the work in and be on the ground, um, holding their hand, sometimes figuratively or literally, and getting them using these products and being comfortable with it, because um, that's the way to get to change success and adoption success. So um, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. How do you think your formal training has helped you to be more successful in your role?
Oh, like like I feel like the 10 years that I spent in Fort McMurray were me just applying and observing workers through that lens of organizational behavior to understand like social structures, what's a motivator, what's a pain point, um, just like how people tick. It's really set me up for success and being able to proactively get ahead of things that I know might be a challenge or a roadblock, and just have much more like easy change.
Awesome. What excites you the most about the future of this transformation? Like, is there a certain tech or a new opportunity that just keeps you up at night out of excitement?
Uh, Honestly, like what makes me so excited and happy is now workers have tools to make really good decisions when they're alone in the field because they're not alone anymore. For workers to be connected to their crews via Teams or have procedures at their fingertips or are able to video call their engineer friends for a second opinion, like that gets me so fired up. Like I wish I had that when I was a shift supervisor in the field, because we would have made decisions differently and we would have kept our workers safer and obviously prevented the incidents. So that's what really gets me going. And into the future, it's augmenting this like the little supercomputer that we all have in our pockets, augmenting it with other accessories and technologies. So connected gas detection, radio, um, just so many exciting things to do in terms of um, making workers' lives easier and taking off some of this extra gear that they wear and making them feel like they're enabled in their job.
And where do you see AI fitting into all of this?
AI, I see as if you're doing your strategy correctly, you shouldn't even notice that there's been a change, really. It should just be an overlay on top of your data strategy. And then one day, as a field worker, you're able to see more help when you're doing a certain process. If you're troubleshooting, there might be a little bit more help in the background, whatever that looks like. I see it as just a way for us to enable our workers so that they are doing less administration and are getting the information that they need when they need it.
And are you using AI on the backside? You've talked a lot about data. Are you using any AI tools to help you manage that data flow to be able to call out when you really need to notice something?
We are beginning, yes, yes, we are. And we are beginning to see the practicality of it and then prioritize where we go from here. Like we're just in the initial stages.
As are many of us, as it's constantly changing and evolving and bringing more and more capabilities to our fingertips. You've talked a lot about piloting to scaling, and something that I see it happen a lot is we do a lot of pilots and we don't often get to that full scale implementation. What advice would you get to individuals when they're designing their pilots to scaling an innovation?
I know, Sarah, like what's so sad is we have these amazing pilots. And like you had mentioned, where the workers are like, please don't take this away. This is like a thing I use for work every day. We see these amazing pilots, and then what happens is these individuals that are so great that are leading the pilots, they eventually go on to different things. And then the pilot loses steam and the technology kind of wavers, and then it's usually stood down. So when doing these pilots at organizations, what I recommend is go in knowing that the technology is going to work. Like again, you're designing this product, like it should be 80% good. Have confidence and courage that it's working. The pilot is only meant as a way to learn better tips and tricks on the change management piece, how to deploy more effectively, make your pilot time bound, and then aggressively scale. So when you are designing your initial pilot, you should also be designing for enterprise. That's the recommendation I give.
And are there any of those lessons learned that you see kind of applicable across all pilots from that refining change management and that implementation strategy?
Yeah. So like it's change management philosophy and some stuff, and then it's end user like personalities for other things. And like change management philosophy, you have your change champions at every one of the operating sites. You make sure that the end users feel like they have skin in the game. They've been part of the design. They own a lot of it, that you want them to have ownership. And then you want to have like really strong communication and strong support from leadership. But then the end user side was that we've learned time and time again is you need to be boots on the ground. You need to be in coveralls. You need to be with your end users to make sure that you get the full adoption, because they will find very creative ways to not use products or to break products in ways that I would never imagine. That always is inspiring to me. But that is required for these end users in industrial to have boots on the ground. And then the individuals that are on the ground from the project to have a strong amount of empathy, and then ideally actually having lived that experience, that frontline experience.
Is there an example where you've had to course correct where maybe something wasn't rolled out well, you weren't getting the engagement that you wanted or needed, and you were able to kind of go in and do something different to drive that change?
Yeah, like I like to talk about when I first came to corporate with this like digitalization organization. And what I came into was a project where we were buying a bunch of devices that were rated for hazardous locations, with under the premise of we think this tool will be the most productive tool. And we would ship them to sites. We weren't actually at the sites. And the engagement that we got with these digital, like intrinsically safe devices was abysmal. Like it was less than 10%. And by flipping our thinking on its head, where we're like, okay, instead of us dictating at the center what we think is the most productive and going to the sites and seeing what they want to use, what would actually feel like help? Is it a tablet? Do you want to carry a tablet for your full shift? Or do you want to carry a phone? Do you want to carry a laptop? By starting these conversations with the end users, we were able to get to a form factor and a product that at the end of the day, we've deployed over 10,000 of these devices, and we have well over 95% of engagement. Like I went from the project where ops managers would yell at me for being in their operating areas, and now they'll call me and yell at me because they don't have the intrinsically safe phone for their new worker and they need it for work. So that is an example that I love to point to.
It's a great example of really like just understanding, right? Do you want to wear a tablet on your head? Do you want AR glasses, or do you just want an iPhone that you're used to using outside of work and you've been using for years and you already feel comfortable with? If there was one thing that listeners walked away from this conversation with, what would that be?
Oh, Sarah, I'm going to say a couple things.
There's no
um,
rules.
the one thing is like have confidence and acknowledge that you know your business the best. Like, and I'm a real proud like advocator for our industry in Alberta. Like Albertans and Canadians, like we know our industry better than any consultant or anyone from Silicon Valley. Like, and as an example, like I work with like some of like the majors in Silicon Valley, and they look to us to dictate their strategy because they know that. So don't rely on other people telling you on what you should do. Like, listen to your workforce. Like, we know our business better than anyone. And I see, especially Alberta, being a place for like just leading this industrial revolution. And we really are. Like, I'm very excited. And then the other piece that I would give to my peers and others in industries is let's stop the madness with pilots and let's deploy at scale. We need to start deploying this across our enterprises so that we can even begin this journey. Because I know a lot of the peers and lots in the industry, they don't have connectivity. There's no consistent hardware. There's no consistent application or platform strategy. And then we're talking about AI. Like let's take a few steps back, because this journey is not going to happen in a couple years. Like Suncor's been doing this for 8 years, right? And we are just at the precipice of having a really solid data strategy.
I love that you mentioned that connectivity as kind of that one of those fundamental things, because so much of the work and solutions really requires that connectivity. So having that be kind of your foundational strategy of like, we have to have this before we can do X, Y, and Z is a really good piece of advice for people who are just starting out on their journey. Any last thoughts you want to leave with us of things that we haven't maybe covered that you think would be valuable for the audience?
Focus on worker safety. Focus on what the workers want, and the money will come. Like I'm always mindful of the fact that we need our return on investment. The return that we have on efficiencies is just insane. But like this iPhone pilot, this project, some of these like health and safety apps, like they were the beginning of our journey. And by focusing on the right values, which is worker safety, making workers happier, making workers more empowered, you will get to where you want to be.
It's great. Scott, are there any questions? I've hogged all of our time with Andrea because this was just so fun at talking with somebody of just very similar mindsets to myself. Is there anything you wanted to ask before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, it was a great, I knew it was going to be a great conversation, and I knew you guys were going to get into it. And yeah, a lot of the questions I had, you definitely covered off. You know, one of my fears is just the Safeopedia audience at large generally is medium-sized organizations. And I'm concerned, that they're going to listen to your story and they're going to look up Suncor and see how big an organization it is and how much available resources you have. And so is there any advice for somebody who's maybe working in that smaller, medium-sized organization who might feel like they don't have the support or the resources to kind of go after a project like this?
Totally, Scott. And like some of my best friends in this space, they are medium and small, and they talk about this. Um, Reality is, um, there's an opportunity to be more resourceful with the way that you get devices out to your workers, the way that you get applications out to your workers. I know one like very small company that has a program through like their health spending account where they can opt in and participate in their connected worker watch strategy. They're using watches for worker fall detection, and again, like very worker safety oriented. So that was like one very creative way to hedge some of the cost. Um, but the other way that I'd push back is um, like you don't need the Cadillac of everything. Like you don't need the Cadillac of connectivity. Like Suncor chose the Cadillac because we rely on our connectivity for like highly critical safety systems like radios. Like that might not be your industry. Like if the radio goes down and you have to phone call someone, like that's probably okay for most people. You don't need the Cadillac. So you need to right size for your business. And my last point would be, in the scheme of things, the investment in tech is really low compared to the amount of return that you get. Like we are seeing 20-fold returns on our initial investment. And I know that it sounds like a lot, like to buy like a new iPhone is $1,000. Like that's a lot of money, but we're seeing returns and ways to become more efficient that you're talking like 10, 20, and more fold. So in the scheme of things, I see it as being really well worth it. There's no other projects that are like this.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Andrea. It was absolutely amazing to hear your change management be so strong, how you've engaged the end users from the very beginning and helping to identify what are the next transformations to kind of happen. Once again, thank you for your time and being a part of this. If people wanted to connect with you, is there a good way for them to go about it?
I'm a LinkedIn girl. I am, and I'm always happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and advice today. It was absolutely amazing. And thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.